Hello everybody and welcome back to What's Jay Reading, home of the old, the obscure, and the bizarre. I am, obviously, Jay, with a brand new selection of stories, so sit back and relax. For this episode, we're taking a look at two newer releases. Recent miniseries from the Big Two with a similar theme of bringing old and forgotten characters back to the forefront. If classic Marvel is the house of ideas, then modern Marvel is the crack den of mistakes. Fortunately, sometimes even mistakes are miracles, which, incidentally, is kind of the theme of this book's focus. Joe Fixit is a 5-issue mini spotlighting the big gray beast in an untold adventure of his, as always taking care of business in the City of Sin in whatever way necessary. Alongside artist Yidere Sonar, the mini is a sensational return for original creator and industry veteran Peter A. David, who's back to once again tell the exploits of the humongous handyman. Fixit has always had a dedicated segment of Hulk fans attached to him, and he's much better known nowadays thanks to his recent reappearance during Immortal Hulk, but to give the long and short of it, Joe Fixit is the alias used by the Grey Hulk, adopting the name during a story arc focusing on him from Pad's Hulk run during the late 80s. As is fairly well known, back in the first few issues of his book, the Hulk was depicted differently than how we know him today, with drab gray skin and a more intelligent, and sociopathic, personality. For various reasons, this didn't last, and Hulk quickly became the big green midwit we all know and love. However, during Pad's run on the book, he reintroduced the Grey Hulk, re-establishing him as a separate personality, essentially the same as the regular Hulk, but with the intellect to control his actions. The Hulk would go on the run, now freed of his impulsive rage, seeking to make a life for himself the way he wants, while keeping Banner deep under wraps. Hulk would eventually make his way to Vegas, making a new life for himself as Joe Fixit, getting in deep with the local crime family as a handyman of sorts for whatever inconveniences cropped up around town. Sadly, fate has other plans, and Joe's old life keeps coming back to bother him. Joe's tenure, though comparatively brief, quickly became widely popular with fans, as he quickly cemented himself numerous iconic moments both in and out of his own book. Most notably his spot on the infamous New Fantastic Four, but as tends to be the case, the Hulk would eventually go through another series of changes as the years went on, and Joe would fall to the wayside. At least until recently when he made a grand reappearance in Immortal Hulk, as short-lived as it was. But this was enough to get him back on the radar, and paved the way to this brand new mini throwing us back to witness one of his previously unseen exploits. But is it worth the effort? Let's read on. The mini focuses on, naturally, good old Mr. Fixit. Hard at work keeping his employer happy and his brand new life as stable as can be, despite the unruly slime that wants to disturb the delicate peace. But the surprising stability of Vegas' underbelly is seen by that slime as premium real estate. And no one sits upon the throne of slime higher than the Kingpin, who's come to town to establish some new management. And as always, Fisk isn't willing to take no for an answer. This puts Joe into Kingpin's crosshairs and the whole city set between them. Luckily for Mr. Fixit, our friendly neighborhood Spider-Man just so happens to be paying a visit at just the right time for him to meddle. To that end, it's more of a stealth Spidey title than a book about Joe Fixit, but I wouldn't exactly call that a negative. The two always played off each other well, and Pad still understands what made the two work so well, same as how he did back then. That's really been the strong suit of all these recent throwback minis Marvel has done, getting the people who know the character the best to tell a fresh new story with them. Timeline-wise, the series is a bit awkwardly placed, though. The story establishes it taking place right after Hulk 349, when Spidey came to town and teamed up with Joe to fight some crazy techno-terrorists? Techerists? Whatever. But that issue ended with Joe being abducted by Dr. Doom, so it doesn't really leave any space for it to occur. Though I suppose that story never explicitly said it's the same day, so who really cares? You can tell right off the bat that Pad hasn't missed a beat in all these years since. His understanding of the Marvel roster and what makes them all work is still at the peak, with every scene filled with action, excitement, and actually good jokes. It is certainly a more comedic story than you'd expect, though not to the degree it doesn't take the narrative seriously. There are a lot of really top-tier jokes throughout that go beyond the usual superhero quips you're used to. Clever use of the setting and characters for plenty of good setups and strong payoffs. Special spotlight here to what may be the single funniest thing Spider-Man has ever done, getting his face painted to look like his mask just in case it got taken off. The story itself is fairly standard fare. Kingpin comes into town to seize control of criminal affairs, but Mr. Fixit and his employer aren't interested in playing ball, so Kingpin tries to stack the odds in his favor. It's a very fun story, but one that's relatively straightforward. My only real problem with the series is the pacing. The story and the content within don't quite feel like they needed 5 issues to tell, and there's certainly a decent chunk that could be trimmed out to pare it down to a shorter runtime. While I wouldn't say much of the space is wasted up until the end, there's definitely enough room for condensing things. Though Pad does take some great opportunities to explore Hulk's character, much the same as he did back in his run, as seen in issue 3 with both a flashback of Spidey and Hulk in a diner, as well as Bruce and Fixit debating amongst themselves. They're both great explorations of Hulk's character and show that Pad has a deep appreciation for the Big Green Bruiser, really truly understanding him in a way few other writers really have, building off of material both from his own run and newer ideas too. Really, just about the only content I would say is truly wasted is during the last act, with the obligatory costume punch-up, a 3-way battle forming between Spidey's usual rogues, hired by the Kingpin as muscle, some Magia C-listers trying to step in on Kingpin's takeover, and our dynamic duo looking to put a stop to both. It's not really all that bad to be fair, but it's also nothing you haven't seen a billion times before, and feels tacked on obligatorily. That all being said, the art holds the story together well. It's reminiscent of Mark Bagley's style, with a really good choice for colors and shading. Costume or not, every character is distinct visually, and the action flows really well across the pages, with a few gripes on a few spots. I think we can all agree it's leagues better than the art in Joe's original run, though. The Fixit mini is a nice little slice of classic Marvel brought to the modern day and age. It's certainly niche for sure, but that's the biggest strong point for the mini. With a smaller target audience, the greater attention to detail and appreciation for the material allowed. It's fortunately very beginner friendly. You pretty much need to know nothing about the old run going in to enjoy, but it's also not narratively orphaned from its origin. It's a real great pleasure seeing Pad back on the Hulk after all these years, and I'm hoping he pulls through his recent health issues quickly and painlessly. And who knows, maybe he'll get one more chance to write the Hulk soon. Moving on, we have what might be the first proper follow-up to a story I've previously reviewed, the recent Stargirl mini, The Lost Children. Lost Children, a 6-issue mini, is once more brought to us by Jeff Johns at the writing desk and Todd Knock at the drafting table, picking up on plot threads the duo previously established. The mini follows up on the plot threads established by Stargirl's Spring Break special from the previous year, which I discussed in an earlier episode back when it came out. For those newer to the show, or just hoping for a quick recap, Stargirl and her stepdad/sidekick Stripe reunited with the 7 Soldiers of Victory in order to stop the Clock King, who was getting into shenanigans. During said shenanigans, Stargirl discovers via a time rift that Wing, the Crimson Avenger's lost, deceased sidekick, was still alive and lost somewhere in time and space. Though the 7 soldiers don't quite believe it, Stargirl and Red Arrow take it upon themselves to discover exactly what and where Wing has been all these years. Picking up sometime after this special, we find our hero Courtney, as always, in trouble with her family for being too obsessed with hero work to the detriment of her real life. An argument she immediately forgets when Red Arrow tips her off to the disappearance of Dan Dunbar, sidekick to forgotten hero TNT, who the duo learned had unearthed a lengthy collection of kids' sidekicks seemingly erased from history altogether before himself disappearing. And when strange phenomena begin occurring around them, Stargirl and Arrow set off to follow the notes left behind and discover the whereabouts of Dan, Wing, and these sidekicks that never were. Unfortunately for them, this brings them exactly to where they wanted to be, the Forgotten Orphan Island, where the sidekicks that time forgot are being held captive by a psychotic monster called the Childminder, holding the sidekicks prisoner for some unknown motive. With Red Arrow now added to the Childminder's collection, Stargirl must unite the few sidekicks still free together to escape imprisonment from the mysterious island and return everyone back to where they belong. Right off the bat, I can say that both Johns and Knock haven't missed a beat. The two complement each other well, carrying the tone and characters consistently across both art and text. Johns' obsession with the forgotten characters of the past reaches a new height here, the central narrative being a literal rescue attempt to bring these heroes back into the spotlight. There's some very meticulous attention to detail with these characters. Even with a large roster, they all look and feel the part of the classic roster of sidekicks. One of the interesting details I like is that there's a good mix of both real and original sidekicks, and with the way both Johns and Knock work with their characters and designs, each and every one looks and feels authentic. Not one single new sidekick stands out as being brand new and really sells the idea of them being so forgotten by time there's no record of them. I mean, ignoring specific societal elements involved with them allegedly being from the 1930s, but let's not get into that topic, shall we? While the idea of giving sidekicks to heroes who never had them helps sell the theme of the story, as characters there's a few too many introduced all at once to really give them a proper spotlight to get to care about them, especially those connected to heroes that aren't very interesting to begin with. Out of all the new sidekicks, however, I think the most interesting conceptually is The Boom, aka Judy Garrick, the long-lost sidekick and daughter of Jay Garrick. Flash fan bias aside, Judy has a dynamic setup that's immediately engaging to a reader, with a fun personality befitting her family, and a background that makes her fit nicely into the greater universe. And the father-daughter hero duo is underutilized in my opinion, so I like seeing it used here. Flash purists might argue that giving Jay a daughter messes up his dynamic with the Flash family, as well as his relationship with Impulse specifically, but I would disagree as, on a fundamental level, Judy and Bart are different enough that there shouldn't be any conflict with their relationships. Though we'll have to wait and see how later writers handle her inclusion. Also, her name is just terrible. Our villain, the Childminder, is interesting conceptually. A deformed bird woman, twisted and crazed, who's got a fairly clear motive. Believing that she's helping save children from being cast off and forgotten, much the same as she was, this help consists of plucking the sidekicks out of space and time and holding them hostage. But an interesting motive and suitably ghastly design doesn't save her from the ironic fate of just being rather forgettable as a villain. I feel it's largely due in part to her end goal not being altruistic in nature. She's not taking the children out of her own twisted sense of compassion, but rather that she's been working with an unknown force to acquire and sell off these children to them. Why and what? Ultimately for selfish reasons. This also causes her to be shoved into a secondary role in the greater story, not leaving much room to be properly utilized. With her employer being an established character, as we'll soon discuss, it further lessens any impact as there's already a spot waiting for them that could have been given entirely to her. Again, this is ironically at odds with the overall theme of the story, that being the struggle to be remembered and how often those once important faces become cast off to be forgotten by time. And I actually really like this as a theme. It's utilized incredibly well by Johns, and just about every character's arc in the story revolves around it. Red Arrow struggles with abandonment, the many sidekicks all come to blows over it, creating strife amongst themselves. Our villains all fight against their own abandonment. Just about the only one who doesn't personally struggle with it is Stargirl. And her role here is more the struggle to help all the forgotten sidekicks be reclaimed to prove herself once again. More specifically, the wish to save Wing from the grisly fate awaiting him. As someone who's made a habit of focusing on the obscure and forgotten stories of the medium, I find it particularly relatable, and the meta-narrative aspects of characters so forgotten they literally didn't exist until now is a very interesting one. While certainly not a new idea for sure, this is definitely one of the better examples that comes to mind, especially in recent years. That being said, while the themes are well used, and the story well told, the actual plot threads are cluttered to an almost impenetrable degree. To start with, the events within get kicked off thanks to the after effects of Flashpoint. Again!
Who came up with the Flashpoint?
Does that fucker Barry Allen.
Get out of here, you fucker!
But on top of Barry's funky little time whoopsie, we're also dealing with the fallout of Dr. Manhattan rubbing his fat cock all over space-time and Doomsday Clock, Batman's bullshittery from Flashpoint Beyond, whatever the fuck Johns was cooking with his schizo-ass divine continuum nonsense, and about 10 other fucking things that did not need to be brought back up. Needless to say, if you're not autistically devoted to whatever the fuck has been going on with this side of DC, you're gonna be hopelessly lost. Even comparatively minor details, like the reveal of Childminder's mystery buyer as the android Hourman, last seen in John's JSA run, only getting the barest of recaps here, missing out on several key details about him, least of all being that it should be fucking impossible that he's here, and as someone not already familiar with him, it serves as a major narrative roadblock. This harms the overall story pretty hard, and even for someone like myself who knows what is being talked about, it can be distracting. While I can appreciate that Johns is finally getting a chance to wrap all these lingering tangents up, they aren't spread out enough throughout the story, dumping it all at once and makes it overwhelming. As well, the last second reveal of the real villain being a bad future copy of Rip Hunter's sidekick is kind of unnecessary for a variety of reasons, and he's barely in the story as is, so it gets no time to develop. While the actual ending itself is really good in my opinion, our man breaks out of his control and frees all the last sidekicks, save for Wing, as despite all efforts to now, Stargirl's forced to let return to die in battle with the Nebula Man in order to keep things stable. And they all return to real time with a bittersweet reunion awaiting the sidekicks, and Stargirl planning on forming a new team for all the lost sidekicks to stay active in the superhero game in modern day. Despite everything, it does end up as a proper happy ending for everyone involved. Save for maybe Hunter's sidekick, but who cares about him? And I do like the idea of the big, forgotten sidekick hero team, though it's ultimately up to whoever's writing them to see whether the execution lives up to it. Overall, the story and the ending utilize the core theme and meaning strongly. It's all about struggling with being remembered, the pain of being forgotten, and coming to terms with your place in the world. Every character deals with it in some form, and the way it shapes the narrative makes John's intent clear. While the story is relatively buried by the usual continuity shenanigans, it doesn't harm that message, and in a way the ending strikes out even against these tangents. But that still doesn't make for a particularly enjoyable read for a more casual reader base. All of this, even the bad, are carried wonderfully by Nock's art. As usual, he's got a wonderful way of composing the panels, a bright cartoony design scheme and color palette that enhances the story even at its weaker parts, though he does fall a bit into some rather strong same-facing in this one. Lost Children is another great entry to the ever-growing pile of JSA-adjacent stories. Though overall hampered by the many story threads it incorporates, it manages to craft a compelling narrative nonetheless, and shows that despite everything, Geoff Johns does still have the spirit which made his works popular to begin with. While ultimately a difficult recommendation because of this, for someone with an appreciation to the characters within, or the forgotten concept of the sidekick in general, it's definitely a must-read. Maybe keep a few wiki tabs open just in case though. That'll be all for me this time. I'll be back later with more of the bizarre tales forgotten by history, but for now remember, if you ever meet your future self, steal that jerk's wallet. It'll be their problem, not yours.